It was a chilly October evening when Mark settled into his cozy, one-bedroom apartment, eager for a quiet night in. The rain tapped lightly against the window, a rhythmic backdrop to his usual routine. He made himself a cup of herbal tea, the steam curling up like wisps of ghostly fingers, and plopped down on the worn couch with a stack of old horror novels, ready to immerse himself in eerie tales. As the night deepened, the light from his lamp cast elongated shadows that danced across the walls. The wind howled outside, but Mark found solace in the familiar creaks of his apartment. He flipped through pages, lost in stories of haunted houses and restless spirits. The clock ticked steadily, marking time in the silence. Then, a sound broke through the stillness, a faint tapping, rhythmic and soft. At first, he dismissed it as the rain, but it grew louder, more insistent. Mark paused, listening intently. It came from the kitchen, a place where shadows seemed to linger longer than in other rooms. The tapping continued, a deliberate pattern, almost as if someone was trying to get his attention. Curiosity piqued. Mark set his book aside and stood up, the creaking of the floorboards underfoot mingling with the strange noise. He approached the kitchen, the air thick with a chill that didn't seem to come from the storm outside. The tapping persisted, now accompanied by a faint whisper, indistinct but chilling. It seemed to echo off the walls, like a forgotten memory trying to resurface. Heart pounding, he peered around the corner. The kitchen was dim, illuminated only by the streetlight filtering through the window. Everything appeared in its place, his coffee maker, the drying dishes, and the old fridge that hummed a steady tune. But the sound, what was that tapping? It was coming from inside the fridge. Mark hesitated, fear creeping up his spine as he approached the appliance. He opened the door, a rush of cold air hitting his face. Inside, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Leftovers, a few bottles of water, and a half-empty carton of milk. Yet the tapping had stopped. Silence wrapped around him, heavier than before. Just as he started to pull away, it began again, a soft, persistent knock, now echoing from the living room. He felt a shiver race down his back. Reluctantly, he turned and made his way back to the living room, each step feeling as though he were moving through thick fog. As he stepped inside, he noticed something odd. The shadows seemed to twist and writhe, almost sentient. The lamp flickered, casting erratic light that played tricks on his eyes. He tried to shake off the feeling of unease, reminding himself it was just his imagination. But then, he heard it, a soft, low moan that curled through the air like smoke. It seemed to come from the very walls of his apartment, a sound so full of sorrow that it made his heart race. He scanned the room, seeking out the source, when suddenly, the front door creaked open ever so slightly, despite the lock being firmly in place. Mark's breath caught in his throat. The door should have been secure. With his heart hammering, he approached cautiously, his hand hovering near the doorknob. It was then he noticed the temperature had dropped significantly, a biting chill that wrapped around him like an icy cloak. His instincts screamed at him to retreat, to slam the door shut and lock it tight, but curiosity rooted him in place. What was out there? He peered into the darkness beyond the threshold, where the hallway stretched into shadows, and for a moment, he thought he saw a figure lurking just out of reach, a silhouette too faint to discern. Just as he was about to step back, a gust of wind rushed through the doorway, slamming the door wide open. The air was thick with a strange energy, and from somewhere deep within the building, the whispering grew louder, more urgent. Mark stumbled back, his pulse racing as the shadows twisted even more violently around him. He knew he had to act, but dread weighed heavily on his chest. The night was far from over, and something was clearly not right. With each passing moment, the air thickened, and the whispers turned into frantic voices, calling his name. A cacophony of sound enveloped him, drawing him closer to the threshold between the known and the unknown, where the darkness waited with open arms. Mark stood frozen, the chaotic whispers swirling around him, a symphony of voices rising and falling like the tide. They echoed his name, Mark, but each iteration felt distorted, as if spoken through a veil of anguish. He clenched his fists, wrestling with the urge to flee and the overwhelming need to understand what was happening. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, heart racing. The door remained ajar, and the darkness beyond beckoned him like an old friend. He could almost convince himself that he was dreaming, that he would wake up any moment to find everything normal again. But the cold air and the whispers felt all too real. As he crossed the threshold, the atmosphere shifted. The light from his apartment flickered behind him, and shadows danced at the edges of his vision. He peered into the hallway, each step echoing ominously. The dim light revealed nothing but the stretch of his small building, yet the air hummed with a presence that made his skin prickle. Then, from the corner of his eye, he caught a flicker of movement, something pale darting between the shadows. He turned quickly, but nothing was there. Just the empty corridor, lined with old, faded wallpaper that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. He could feel the weight of the silence pressing against him, urging him to go back, but curiosity clawed at his mind. He moved deeper into the hall, glancing at the other doors that lined it, all closed tight. They felt like sentinels holding secrets within. Just as he reached the end, the whispers crescendoed into a frantic plea. "Help us, Mark!" They cried in unison, sending chills down his spine. Suddenly, a door at the end of the hall swung open with a creak that echoed like a gunshot. A pale figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, backlit by a flickering light. Mark squinted, his heart racing. The figure was a woman, her hair long and disheveled, her eyes wide with fear. "Please, you have to help me," she gasped, her voice raw. "They're coming for you." Before he could respond, she stepped back into the room, beckoning him with frantic gestures. He hesitated, glancing back down the corridor where the shadows seemed to thicken, pulsing with an unseen energy. But the urgency in her voice pulled him closer. Mark took a step toward her, then another, the distance between them shrinking as he crossed the threshold into the room. It was dimly lit, filled with a musty smell and cluttered with forgotten furniture draped in sheets. The woman turned, her expression a mixture of relief and terror. "My name is Clara," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been trapped here for so long. You must listen, there's something wrong with this place." As she spoke, the shadows around them flickered and twisted, drawing closer. "They feed off fear, off despair. You can't let them take you." Mark felt the gravity of her words sink in. The whispers grew louder, filling the room with a cacophony of desperate voices. He could feel his pulse quicken, every instinct screaming at him to run. "What do you mean? Who are they?" he managed to stammer. Clara stepped closer, her eyes wide and pleading. "The spirits of those who came before us, they're trapped, just like me. They're searching for a way to escape, and you might be the key." The walls seemed to pulse with energy, and the shadows writhed around them like serpents. Mark felt an icy grip on his heart, a sense of dread that he couldn't shake. "How am I the key?" he asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "There's a reason you heard the whispers," Clara said, her gaze intense. "You have a connection to this place. Something in your past ties you here. You must confront it before it's too late." Before he could process her words, the lights flickered violently, and the temperature in the room plummeted. The shadows surged forward, taking on shapes that were disturbingly human, their faces twisted in agony. "Mark!" Clara shouted, panic flooding her voice. "We have to act now." He felt his heart race as the figures loomed closer, reaching out with cold, spectral hands. The whispers morphed into a frantic chorus of cries, drowning out all thought. He needed to find a way to break free, to escape this nightmare. But what could he do? Mark's mind raced. A memory flickered in the back of his mind, something buried deep. The stories from his childhood, tales of loss and longing that his grandmother used to tell him, were they more than just stories? Did they hold the key to understanding this chaos? "Clara, I need to remember," he shouted, his voice barely rising above the clamor. "Help me." As the figures pressed closer, Clara grabbed his arm, her grip firm yet frantic. "Focus. Think about your past, your family. That's where the answers lie." Just then, The world around them twisted violently, and Mark felt himself being pulled into a swirling vortex of light and shadow. Memories rushed back, fragments of his childhood, laughter, tears, and a warm embrace. But alongside those memories were darker images, moments of loss and heartache that he had tried to forget. "Remember, Mark," Clara urged, her voice piercing through the chaos. "You can do this." He closed his eyes, letting the memories wash over him, feeling the pain and joy intertwine. And in that moment, he realized that to confront the darkness, he had to face his own fears. But what lay ahead? He had no way of knowing. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Mark's heart raced as he embraced the tumult of memories flooding back. The laughter of his younger self echoed, but it was tinged with the bittersweet ache of loss. He could see his grandmother in his mind's eye, sitting in her old armchair, telling stories by the fireplace, her voice weaving tales of love and sorrow that felt as real as the air he breathed. But then came the darker moments the day he had lost her. The weight of grief crashed over him like a wave, suffocating and cold. He remembered the emptiness that followed, the way her absence had wrapped around him, isolating him in a cocoon of despair. That loss, he realized, was a thread that tied him to this haunted place, to Clara, and to the spirits that lingered in the shadows. "Mark, focus." Clara's voice broke through the fog of memories, sharp and clear. "You must channel that pain into something powerful. You can free them." The shadows around them surged, their forms shifting and contorting in a dance of anguish. Faces appeared in the darkness, lost souls trapped between realms, each one desperate for release. They reached out, fingers stretching like vines toward him, their mouths forming silent screams. Mark felt a swell of emotion rise within him. "I'm sorry," he shouted, his voice steadying as he confronted his sorrow. "I'm sorry for all of you. I didn't know how to help." In that moment, a ripple of energy surged through the room, and the shadows paused, their frantic movements stilling for an instant. Clara's grip tightened on his arm, her eyes wide with anticipation. "Yes, keep going." He drew on his memories, summoning the love his grandmother had given him, the warmth of her laughter, the strength in her stories. "You're not forgotten," he cried out, feeling the power of his words. "You all deserve peace. I will not let your pain go unrecognized." As if his words ignited a spark, the shadows began to shift. The cacophony of whispers transformed into a harmonious blend of voices, rising in unison as the figures moved closer, drawn to the light of his memory. Mark could feel their longing, their desire to be freed from the pain that had bound them to this world. But just as hope began to bloom, a darker presence emerged from the depths of the shadows. It was larger, more ominous, with eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. This entity, a swirling mass of despair and malice, surged forward, intent on extinguishing the light Mark had just begun to create. "Mark!" Clara shouted, fear gripping her voice. "You have to stand strong. It feeds on fear, don't let it take you." The darkness roared, the air crackling with energy. Mark felt a wave of dread wash over him, the weight of his past threatening to crush him again. He remembered his grandmother's words, the lessons wrapped in her stories, how love could conquer even the deepest sorrow. With every ounce of strength, he focused on that love, pouring his heart into it. "You are not alone," he yelled into the swirling void. "You are worthy of love. You can be free." The shadows began to ripple, the anguished faces shifting from fear to hope as they rallied around him. Mark felt their energy blend with his own, a surge of warmth and light pushing back against the encroaching darkness. Clara's eyes glimmered with determination, her spirit buoying him. The entity recoiled, a howl of rage echoing through the hallway, but it was met with a chorus of voices, rising in defiance. "We are not forgotten. We are not lost," they cried, filling the space with a renewed vigor. Just as Mark felt the tide turning, the darkness surged forward again, this time more violently. The air crackled with electricity, and he could feel the malevolent energy clawing at his resolve. He stumbled backward, his heart racing, but Clara stepped beside him, grounding him. Together, she urged, her voice fierce. We can do this. He nodded, heartened by her presence. With renewed strength, he closed his eyes again, focusing on the memories that had shaped him. The warmth of his grandmother's embrace, the laughter shared on rainy days, the lessons learned from loss. He envisioned that love radiating outward, a beacon in the darkness. As he opened his eyes, he felt a surge of light erupting from within him, illuminating the room. The shadows shivered and shrank back, the dark entity swirling in rage, but unable to approach the growing light. The anguished spirits began to coalesce around Mark, their energies combining with his, forming a brilliant tapestry of colors that danced in the air. But the dark entity roared, lashing out with tendrils of shadow that lashed against the walls. You think you can escape me? It hissed, its voice a twisted echo of despair. You are bound to this place just as I am. Mark felt a jolt of fear, but Clara squeezed his hand, her resolve unwavering. No, we are not bound. We are breaking free. In that moment, a fierce determination ignited within him. I will not let you win, he shouted, channeling all his grief, love, and strength into a single command. You have no power over me. With that declaration, the light surged brighter, the shadows shrieking as they were forced back. Mark felt the energy of the spirits rise, their voices harmonizing in a crescendo of hope. But even as the darkness receded, he could feel it lurking, waiting for a chance to strike back. The room began to tremble, the walls vibrating with the intensity of the battle. Mark and Clara stood firm, united against the looming threat, but they both knew the struggle was far from over. The darkness was still there, and with every passing moment, it threatened to reclaim its hold. Mark, we need to find the source of the darkness, Clara urged, her eyes blazing with determination. We have to confront it. Mark nodded, feeling the gravity of their mission settle over him. There had to be a reason this malevolence was anchored to him, to this place. They had to dig deeper, uncover the truth behind the darkness that had entwined itself around their lives. Together, they braced themselves against the tide of shadows, ready to confront whatever lay ahead, knowing that the fate of the spirits and perhaps their own depended on their next move. What secrets awaited them in the depths of this haunting, and would they be strong enough to face the truth? The answers were waiting, just beyond the veil of darkness. Mark felt the air thrum with tension as he and Clara stood at the precipice of an unknown confrontation. The flickering lights cast erratic shadows, and the whispers of the spirits grew quieter, almost reverent, as if anticipating what was to come. The darkness loomed before them, swirling and pulsing, a living entity filled with malice and despair. Where do we even start? Mark asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil around them. How do we confront something this overwhelming? Clara's gaze flicked around the room, her brow furrowed in concentration. We need to find the anchor, the source of this darkness. There has to be something here that's holding it in place, something from the past. Suddenly, the walls of the room trembled, and the shadows shifted, swirling like a storm. Mark could feel a deep, resonating pulse within the floor beneath his feet. It was almost as if the building itself was alive, responding to their presence. Clara took a step forward, her expression fierce. The basement, she said. If there's anywhere this darkness could be tied to, it's down there. That's where the energy could have been drawn, where the history of this place lies. Mark hesitated. The basement was a foreboding place, often filled with the echoes of past tenants, and he could almost hear their muted cries lingering in the damp air. But Clara's conviction fueled his courage. He nodded, steeling himself for what lay ahead. Let's go, he said, taking a deep breath as he moved toward the door that led to the basement stairs. Clara followed closely, her presence a grounding force against the tide of anxiety. As they descended the rickety staircase, the air grew heavier, laden with a musty scent that spoke of long-forgotten memories. The dim light flickered above them, casting elongated shadows that danced along the walls, creating ghostly figures that seemed to reach for them. At the bottom, the basement stretched out before them. A vast, dark space cluttered with old furniture, boxes, and cobwebs that clung like the remnants of despair. Mark's pulse quickened as he surveyed the area, the oppressive atmosphere making it hard to breathe. "Look," Clara whispered, pointing to an old, dusty trunk in the far corner. It was worn and weathered, covered in layers of dust, but there was something about it that felt significant. As they approached, the air around them thickened, and the shadows seemed to swirl with more intensity. Mark felt an instinctual pull toward the trunk, as if it was a beacon calling him closer. Clara knelt beside it, brushing off the dust with trembling hands. "What do you think is inside?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, but I have a feeling it holds answers," Mark replied, his curiosity piqued. "Maybe it's tied to the darkness." Clara nodded, and together they unlatched the trunk. The hinges creaked as they opened it, releasing a cloud of dust that danced in the stale air. Inside, they found an assortment of objects. Faded photographs, old letters, and an intricately carved wooden box that glimmered even in the dim light. Mark picked up a photograph, its edges frayed. It depicted a group of people's smiling faces, laughter frozen in time. Yet, as he studied their expressions, a chill crept up his spine. The faces felt familiar, as if he'd seen them in the hallways of the apartment building before. His eyes widened as he recognized one of the faces, his grandmother, younger and vibrant, standing beside a man Mark didn't recognize. "Who is this?" he muttered, turning the photo toward Clara, who leaned in closer. "I don't know," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "But there's something unsettling about it." As they continued to sift through the trunk, Clara unearthed a bundle of letters tied with a frayed ribbon. "These look personal," she said, carefully untangling the ribbon. "Maybe they'll give us more context." Mark watched as she opened one, her eyes scanning the faded ink. Suddenly, her expression shifted, her eyes widening in shock. "Mark, these letters are from your grandmother." "What? Let me see." He leaned over, and Clara handed him the letter, her fingers trembling. It read, "Dear Elizabeth, I fear the shadows are growing stronger. The stories of our ancestors linger here, tied to this land and to us. I worry for those who dwell in this building. If they cannot confront their fears, the darkness will consume them." Mark's heart raced as he processed the words. "This is about the very place we're standing in," he whispered, realization dawning on him. She knew. She knew something was wrong. Clara's eyes flicked to another letter. "There are more," she said urgently, her hands digging through the contents. "We have to keep looking. There has to be something here that tells us how to confront this darkness." Just as they began to uncover more letters, a gust of wind swept through the basement, slamming the door behind them. The shadows thickened, swirling angrily, the whispers rising into a chaotic roar. "Mark!" Clara shouted, fear evident in her eyes. "We need to finish this now." He felt the pressure of the darkness closing in around them, but he also felt the warmth of the spirits rallying, their energy blending with his own. "We can do this," he yelled over the din, clenching his fists as he focused on the love and memories of his grandmother. "Remember her stories. Remember why we're here," Clara shouted, her voice resolute against the encroaching shadows. With renewed determination, Mark turned to the trunk, rifling through the remaining letters. Each word he read brought forth images of his grandmother's love and the light she had fought to share. He felt a connection to the spirits, their hopes intertwining with his own. "Together, we can break the chains of this darkness," he declared, feeling the energy rise within him. But just then, the swirling shadows coalesced into a towering figure, its eyes burning with an unholy light. "You dare challenge me?" it hissed, the air thick with its malevolence. "You are bound to this place, just as I am." Mark's heart raced, fear surging within him. But Clara stepped forward, defiance in her stance. "We are not bound. We are here to free those you've trapped." The figure shrieked, the darkness vibrating with fury, but Mark could feel the spirits rallying behind him. He closed his eyes, calling on every ounce of love and strength he had ever received from his grandmother. "I will not let you win," he shouted, his voice a clarion call against the darkness. "You will not take any more lives." With that, he opened his eyes and reached for the wooden box they had found in the trunk. He could feel a warmth radiating from it, a pulse of light that resonated with the very essence of his grandmother's spirit. "Clara, help me," he yelled, as they both grasped the box, channeling their energy into it, ready to unleash a wave of light that could shatter the darkness once and for all. But as they prepared to confront the malevolent force, they realized that the true test lay ahead. The shadows writhed and howled, a tempest of anger and despair, challenging them to summon every last bit of courage and love within. Would they succeed in breaking the bonds that had chained the spirits and themselves to this nightmare? The answer lay in their unity, and the shadows were ready to fight back. Mark and Clara stood firm, the weight of the darkness pressing in around them, but they refused to back down. Together, they held the wooden box, feeling its warmth pulse in rhythm with their hearts. The shadows writhed violently, the towering figure looming closer, eyes aflame with fury. "Together, Mark, focus on the love, on the memories," Clara shouted, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. Taking a deep breath, Mark closed his eyes and summoned the warmth of his grandmother's embrace, the laughter they had shared, the stories that had filled his childhood. He pictured the light she had always brought into his life, illuminating even the darkest corners. It felt as if her spirit was right there with him, guiding him. "Now," Clara urged, her grip tightening on the box. They both lifted it high, channeling every ounce of energy into it. The air shimmered around them, and the light began to intensify, illuminating the basement and pushing back against the encroaching shadows. As the light grew brighter, the dark figure let out a furious roar, its form twisting and contorting as if struggling against an unseen force. "You cannot escape me. I am the darkness that binds you," it screeched, its voice echoing like thunder through the basement. But Mark felt the spirits rallying around him, their energies merging with his and Clara's. "We are not afraid," he shouted, his voice resonating with the power of their collective resolve. "We are here to break the cycle." With one last surge of determination, he and Clara brought the box down, slamming it against the ground. The moment it touched the floor, a brilliant wave of light exploded from it, cascading through the basement like a flood of warmth and hope. The shadows recoiled, their forms shrieking in agony as the light washed over them, illuminating the faces of the lost souls caught in the darkness. The spirits emerged from the shadows, swirling around Mark and Clara, their eyes filled with gratitude and relief. They reached for the light, pulling it into themselves, transforming their anguish into a radiant energy that glowed brighter and brighter. Mark felt tears spring to his eyes as he saw the anguish fade from the faces of the spirits, replaced by expressions of peace. The dark entity, now consumed by the light, writhed and twisted, its form dissipating into wisps of shadow that were pulled into the brilliance, losing its grip on the realm it had haunted for so long. With one final, anguished howl, the figure disintegrated, its screams echoing into silence. The shadows that had once clung to the walls began to fade, leaving behind a sense of calm and warmth. Breathless, Mark and Clara stood together, the remnants of darkness evaporating like mist in the morning sun. The basement, once filled with dread, now felt alive with hope and renewal. As the last of the shadows dissipated, Mark turned to Clara, a mixture of disbelief and relief flooding through him. "We did it," he breathed, still processing the whirlwind of emotions. "We really did it," Clara smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "We freed them, Mark. We broke the chains that held them here." The warmth of the spirits enveloped them, a gentle embrace of gratitude and love. In that moment, Mark understood that they had not just liberated the lost souls but also discovered a part of themselves in the process. The pain and loss that had once weighed him down had transformed into something beautiful, a connection to the past, a legacy of love. As they climbed the stairs back to the ground floor, Mark felt lighter, as if the burdens he had carried for so long had been lifted. The air was fresh, the building felt alive, and he could sense the spirits finally at peace, free to move on. Once outside, the night was calm, the stars shining brightly above. Clara turned to him, her expression earnest. "What will you do now?" Mark smiled, a sense of purpose igniting within him. "I'll honor their memory, share their stories, and ensure that the love and light they brought into the world never fade away. We all deserve to be remembered, don't we?" Clara nodded, her eyes sparkling. "Yes, we do. And we'll do it together." With that promise hanging in the air, they walked away from the building, leaving behind the shadows that had once consumed it. And though the memories of the spirits lingered, they were now transformed no longer shackles of sorrow, but rather a tapestry of hope woven through their shared experiences. Mark knew this was just the beginning of a new journey, one that would honor the past while embracing the future. The shadows might have come for him, but he had emerged victorious, armed with love, friendship, and a deeper understanding of the bonds that tie us all together. And in the end, the light always triumphs over the darkness. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.